The text came at 6:52 on a Tuesday morning in late April, and I remember the exact time because I was standing at my kitchen window watching a pair of cardinals work over the feeder I had filled the evening before, and I had my first cup of coffee in my hand, not yet drunk, just warm against my palm, and the phone buzzed on the counter beside me with that particular insistence a phone has when the day intends to be different from the one you were expecting. I did not pick it up right away. That is worth noting, I think, that there was a version of that morning, a whole branching path of it, in which I finished my coffee first and watched the cardinals a while longer and came to the message slower, and I have wondered since whether it would have changed anything. It would not have. The message was the message. But I have learned over 61 years that the small choices we make right before the large moments tend to stay with us, lit up in memory, as if our minds are searching backward for the place where we might have turned. It was a beautiful morning, is the thing. I want you to picture it the way I lived it, because the beauty of it matters to what came after. The light was the particular pale gold of late April in the Hudson Valley, the kind that has finally remembered how to be warm after a long gray winter, and it was coming through the window over my sink and lying across the old butcher block counter in a long, slow stripe, and the cardinals were at the feeder, the male a shock of red against the new green, and the coffee was good, and the house was quiet, and I was happy. I want to establish that. I was, in that moment before the phone buzzed, simply and completely happy, in the small, uneventful way that I had been learning to be happy again after a long time of not being. And I think that is part of why the message landed the way it did. It did not interrupt an ordinary morning. It interrupted a moment of peace I had worked very hard to earn. My name is Margaret. People have called me Meg my whole life, everyone except my late husband, who called me Margaret in full. Slowly, the way you say the name of a thing you intend to keep. I am 61 years old. I live in a small town in the Hudson Valley in New York, in a house with a wide front porch and a sugar maple in the yard that turns the color of a struck match every October. And for 29 years, I worked as a labor and delivery nurse at a regional hospital 40 minutes south of here. I retired 14 months ago. I want to tell you what that retirement meant to me, because it sits underneath everything that followed, and if you do not understand it, you will not understand why a single text message on a Tuesday morning was able to do what it did. 29 years of labor and delivery is 29 years of being the person who does not get to be tired. You understand? When a woman is in the worst and most frightened hour of her life, when something has gone sideways at 2 a.m. and the monitors are saying things no one wants them to say, the nurse does not get to feel her own exhaustion. The nurse sets it down somewhere and picks it up later. In the car, in the parking garage, in the long drive home, as the sun comes up over a world that has no idea what just happened in that room. I did that for 29 years. I was good at it. I will say that plainly, because it is true, and because I spent a career in a place where women who were good at things learned to phrase it as a question. I caught babies whose mothers had been told they would never carry to term. I held the hands of women whose babies did not live, and I did not look away, and I did not hurry them, because the one thing I knew for certain in this life is that you do not hurry a person through the worst thing that has ever happened to them. I was present at the very edge of other people's lives, again and again and again, for 29 years. I want to tell you about one night in particular because it shows you who I was at that hospital and because it matters later. There was a young woman. I will not give details that could identify her, but she was barely 20, and alone, no husband, no mother, no one, and she lost the baby at 36 weeks, which is a loss so close to the finish line that it has a special cruelty all its own. And it was 4 a.m, and the unit was quiet, and she had no one, and so I stayed. My shift had ended. I stayed 3 extra hours, off the clock, and I sat with her while she held her son, and I did not say any of the useless things people say, and I did not leave when it got hard, and when she finally fell asleep near dawn, I sat in the chair by her bed, so that when she woke, she would not wake alone. I drove home that morning hollowed out, scraped clean, the way you are after a night like that, and I want you to hold that image, Me in that chair, refusing to leave a frightened person alone. Because that is the deepest truth of who I am, and the whole story I am about to tell you is, in a way, the story of what happens when a woman who has spent her life refusing to leave others alone finally has to learn to stop abandoning herself. And then I retired. And the retirement was supposed to be the part where I finally got to set the tiredness down and not pick it back up. The part where the presents I had given to strangers for 3 decades came home, finally, to me. I had plans. They were not grand plans, and I want you to hear that, because I think the modesty of them matters. I wanted to garden in the mornings without watching the clock. I wanted to drive up to the lake in the Adirondacks where my husband and I used to go, the lake I had not been able to face in the 4 years since he died, and I wanted to sit on that particular dock and find out whether I could be there now, whether enough time had passed. I wanted to learn to throw pots. There was a studio 2 towns over, a Tuesday-Thursday class, and I had the brochure on my refrigerator held up by a magnet shaped like a tomato. I wanted, after 29 years of being present at the edges of other people's lives, to finally be present at the center of my own. That was the retirement. That was the plan held quietly in my chest, fragile as a held breath. On the Tuesday morning the text arrived, and I had been so careful with it. That plan. I had not rushed at it. After 29 years of being needed every minute, I had given myself permission to go slow, to let the days be unstructured, to sit on my porch in the morning and not have anywhere to be. It had taken me almost a year just to stop feeling guilty about the slowness, to stop feeling that rest had to be earned in advance and paid back later. I had just, that spring, finally begun to feel that the life was mine, that I had arrived somewhere, and I think you can already see the shape of what is coming, the way you can see weather coming across the valley, dark at the far edge of a bright sky. Let me tell you about my daughter, because you are going to need to understand her, and you are going to be tempted, as the story goes on, to think badly of her, and I am going to ask you to resist that temptation a little longer than feels comfortable, because the truth is more complicated than the easy version, and the easy version would let all of us off too. Lightly, including me. Her name is Claire. She is 33 years old. She was, as a child, the kind of bright that arrives a little ahead of itself, reading early, talking early, organizing the other children at her own birthday parties into games of her own design before she was 6. My husband used to say she came out of the womb with a clipboard. She was the sun in our small house, our only child, and we loved her with the particular intensity of parents who have been told by a doctor, somewhere along the way, that there would not be another, so this is the one, this is the whole of it, pour everything in. And we did. I want to be honest about that, because I think it is part of how we got here. We poured everything in. We arranged the world around her. We made ourselves, her father and I, into a kind of reliable weather, a climate she could always count on, warm and present, and there. And a child who grows up inside a reliable weather does not learn to notice the weather. Why? Would she? It is simply the air. It is simply the way things are. It is only later, much later, that you discover the people you took for the air were people all along, with weather of their own. I think of 100 small moments now, looking back, that I did not think anything of at the time. The way that when Claire was in high school and her father and I had planned a rare weekend away, just the two of us, a little inn upstate, the first such trip in years, she had scheduled a party at our house for that exact weekend, having simply assumed the house would be empty and available, not out of defiance, but because it had genuinely not crossed her mind that her parents had a life that might claim a weekend of its own. We canceled our trip. Of course we did. We told ourselves it was fine. We were always telling ourselves it was fine. And every time we told ourselves it was fine, we were teaching her, one more time, that our lives bent around hers as a matter of natural law, the way water runs downhill, requiring no thought and no thanks. Claire married young, at 25, to a decent and somewhat overwhelmed man named Brian, who works in software and travels more than either of them anticipated when they made their vows. The twins came 3 years ago, a boy and a girl, Sam and Sophie, and I want to tell you right now, before any of the rest of it, that I love those 2 children with a force that frightens me a little. I was in the room when they were born. Of course I was. 29 years of catching other people's grandchildren, and then, finally, my own. 2 of them, slick and furious and alive. And I held them in the first hour of their lives, and I felt the whole architecture of my heart rearrange itself to make room. That love is not in question. It was never in question. It is, in fact, the very thing that made the text message so hard, because the easiest thing in the world would have been to say yes. Loving those babies made saying no into the hardest thing I have ever done that did not involve a hospital. Claire's life is hard right now. I want to say that clearly, too. 2 3-year-olds is a hard life. A husband who travels is a hard life. She works part-time from home doing something with marketing that I have never fully understood. And she is stretched thin in the way that young mothers are stretched thin, pulled in 4 directions at every hour, never finishing anything, always behind, always tired. I know that life. I lived a version of it. I have sympathy for it that goes all the way down to the bone. And I want you to hold that sympathy alongside everything else I'm about to tell you, because the moment you let go of it, the moment Claire becomes a villain instead of a person, the story stops being true, and I made myself a promise that I would only tell you true things. But here is the thing I had started to notice in the 14 months since I retired, and it is the thing the text message brought to a point. Claire had stopped seeing me, not stopped loving me. I do not believe that for a moment, but she had stopped seeing me in the way a person stops seeing the weather. I had retired, and in her mind, I understand now, my retirement had not registered as Mom finally gets her own life back. It had registered as Mom is finally available. Those are very different things, and the gap between them is the whole of this story. It had been happening in small ways all year, and I had been letting it. She would call, and, before even a hello had properly landed, ask if I could take the twins Thursday, and I would say yes, because I loved them, and because saying yes was the oldest reflex I had. She had begun to refer to me, to her friends, as her backup. "Oh, my mom's my backup," she would say, lightly, fondly, and I would smile, and something small in me would fold itself a little smaller, because backup is a thing you have, not a person you know. She had stopped asking how I was, in a way that waited for an answer. She loved me. She did not see me. And I had been allowing the not seeing, smoothing it over, telling myself it was fine, the way I had told myself it was fine for 33 years, because the alternative, making myself visible, making myself a person with needs and weather of my own, felt, to a woman built the way I am built, almost like a kind of violence, like abandoning my post. Here is what the text said. I'm going to give it to you exactly, because the wording matters, and because I read it perhaps 40 times that day, and I could recite it in my sleep. Morning. So Brian and I figured out the summer. You're going to have the twins June through August, while I get some things sorted, and Brian's traveling. Full-time, weekdays, I'll drop them at 7:30. Already told the moms group I'm freed up, so don't worry, it's all set. You're a lifesaver. Love you. I want to walk you through what happened in my body when I read that, because it happened in a particular order, and the order is the truest thing I can tell you about it. The first thing was warmth. I want to be honest about that. The very first flicker, before anything else, was a kind of warm pull toward the babies. June through August, all that summer light, Sam's laugh and Sophie's serious little face, the garden full of them, the days full of them. For about 3 seconds, the first 3 seconds, the message landed as a gift, because I do love them, and a summer with them is, in one light, a beautiful thing. And I think it is important that you know that, because the people who tell these stories often pretend that the warmth was never there, that they saw the insult instantly and cleanly. But that is not how it works when you love someone. The warmth comes first. The warmth is real. It is what makes the rest so hard. And then the second thing arrived, right behind the warmth, riding in on the same breath, and the second thing was the cold, because I read the message again, and this time I read the words, not the babies behind the words. You're going to have the twins. Not would you, not could you, not I know this is a huge ask. You're going to have the twins. And then, already told the moms group I'm freed up. She had told other people. She had announced it. She had built it into the architecture of her summer and the summers of the other women in her group before she had said a single word to me because, and this is the part that went into me like cold water, because it had not occurred to her that I might say no. It had not occurred to her that there was a me to consult at all. I was not a person in the plan. I was the plan. I was a resource that had come available 14 months ago when I retired, and she had simply allocated me. Let me sit on that word a moment, because it is the word the whole story turns on. Allocated. It is a word from the world of resources, of budgets, of schedules. You allocate hours. You allocate funds. You allocate equipment. You do not allocate a person. To allocate a person is to have already, somewhere beneath conscious thought, stopped experiencing them as a person at all. And my daughter had allocated me, my whole summer, the precious first free summer of my retirement, the summer I had been quietly planning to use to finally face the lake. She had allocated it, the way you allocate a conference room, and told others it was booked, and the booking of it had felt to her so natural, so frictionless, so much like simply describing the weather that she had not even framed it as a request. There was nothing to request. The weather does not get asked. And the third thing, and this is the one I have thought about most, the third thing was not anger. People expect anger here, and I understand why, but it was not anger. What it was grief. A clean, cold, specific grief. Because in that moment, standing at my kitchen window with the cardinals, still working the feeder and my coffee gone lukewarm in my hand, I understood that the thing I had been quietly afraid of for 14 months was true. My retirement, the thing I had earned over 29 years, the small, fragile plan held in my chest like a breath. It had no weight in my daughter's world. It did not exist for her. She loved me, and she did not see me. And those two things were living side by side in that text message, love you sitting right next to. You're going to have the twins and the awful comedy of it. The way the love and the not seeing were stitched together in the same breath was almost more than I could hold. I set the phone down. I did not reply. Not yet. I had learned something in 29 years of 2 a.m. emergencies, and it is this. The worse the situation, the more important it is to slow down. The instinct under pressure is to react fast, to say the thing, to discharge the feeling. But the fast reaction is almost never the right one. And a sentence sent in the first hot rush of a feeling tends to create 10 new problems for everyone it solves. I had seen it 1,000 times in hospital corridors. The words said in the raw aftermath of fear that everyone spends the next month trying to take back. So I did not reply. I picked up my cold coffee and I poured it out, and I made a fresh cup, and I sat down at my kitchen table, and I let myself feel the whole thing all the way to the bottom before I did anything at all. And I want to tell you what that felt like, sitting at that table, because it is something I have learned, and I think it is worth passing on. It is uncomfortable, almost unbearable, to feel a large feeling all the way to the bottom without doing anything about it. Every cell in your body wants to act, to discharge it, to make the discomfort stop by reacting. But there is a kind of strength, and it is a strength most of us are never taught, in simply holding the feeling, letting it move through you, refusing to act until you have understood it. I sat at that table for the better part of an hour. The cardinals came and went. The light moved across the counter. And slowly, the grief settled into something clearer. And underneath the grief I found, not anger, but a question. And the question was the most important question of my life, and I will come to it. I want to tell you about my husband now, because he belongs in this story, and because I made a decision. At that kitchen table that I could not have made without him, even though he has been gone 4 years. His name was Tom. We were married 31 years. He died of pancreatic cancer at 59, which is a sentence I can write now without my hand shaking, and that took some time. He was a high school history teacher, a patient man, a man who believed that the most important thing you could give a person was your full attention, and who gave it to his students, to me, to Claire, with a consistency that I did not fully appreciate until it was gone, and I felt the absence of it like a draft from a door that would not close. Tom was the one who used to say that Claire came out with a clipboard. He said it fondly, But he also said something else near the end, in one of those clear, strange conversations you have near the end, when the usual noise of life has fallen away, and people say the true things at last. We were in the living room. It was night, the hospice nurse, and I knew those nurses. I was those nurses, and there is a particular vertigo in being on the other side of that bed. The hospice nurse had gone home, and it was just the two of us, and he was lucid in the way he sometimes was in the evenings, the pain managed, the mind briefly clear. And he took my hand, and he said, "Meg, I've been thinking about Claire." He said, "We made her the center of everything. We did it on purpose, and I'd do it again. But we never taught her that we were people too. That's the one thing. She knows we love her. She doesn't know what it costs us. We hid the cost from her whole life, because we wanted her childhood to feel weightless, and it did. But a person who never sees the cost of being loved doesn't learn to ask what it costs. She just takes the love, the way you take air. We did that. Not her. Us." And then he said the part I have carried for 4 years, the part that came back to me at that kitchen table with full force. He said, "Promise me something. When I'm gone, don't disappear into her life. You'll want to. You'll want to fill the hole where I was with being useful to her, because being useful is how you've always loved people. But if you disappear into her, she'll never learn to see you, and one day she'll lose you too, and she won't even know what she's lost because she never knew you were there. Make her see you, Meg, while there's still time. It's the last thing we can give her. Make her see that you're a person." I did not understand what he meant when he said it. I understood it completely 4 years later, standing at my kitchen window with that text message in my hand. We never taught her that we were people too. Claire was not a selfish woman. She was a woman who had grown up inside a love so reliable and so uncomplaining that she had never once been required to notice it had a cost. And now I was retired and available, and the lifelong habit of taking my presence as weightless air had simply extended itself, frictionlessly, into a summer she had allocated without asking. The text message was not a moral failure on Claire's part. It was the predictable harvest of 33 years of a love that had hidden its own cost. And the person who had hidden that cost, carefully, lovingly, for 33 years, was me and Tom. We had done this. The bill had simply come due on a Tuesday in April, addressed to me. And I had, in the 4 years since Tom died, done exactly the thing he warned me against. I had disappeared into her life. I had become her backup, her reliable Thursday, her freed-up retiree. I had filled the hole where Tom was with being useful, because being useful is how I have always loved people, just as he said. And in doing so, I had carried our shared mistake forward alone, deepened it, made it worse. Tom had seen it coming from his deathbed, and I had walked straight into it anyway, because the pull of being needed is the strongest pull I know, and grief had only made it stronger. So the question at that kitchen table, the question underneath the grief, was not how do I punish my daughter for being thoughtless. The question was much harder and much more important, and it was, word for word, the question Tom had handed me 4 years before. The question was, how do I finally make her see me? How do I teach her the thing her father and I spent her whole childhood hiding from her? That I am a person, with a life, and that my presence has a cost, and that love, real love, the kind that lasts, is something you ask for and not something you allocate. How do I do it without breaking the love itself? How do I say no in a way that is actually a deeper yes? A yes to her becoming the kind of woman who can see the people who love her before, as Tom said, it is too late? That was the real question. It was Tom's question. He had asked it of me on his deathbed, and I had not answered it for 4 years, and now a text message had asked it again, and I knew sitting there that I could not put it off any longer, and I knew that the answer was not going to be a text message. I let the whole day pass without replying. This was, I understand, its own kind of message, but it was not strategic, or it was not only strategic. I needed the day. I needed to walk through it carrying the thing, to let it settle into its true shape, to make sure that whatever I said next, I said on purpose and not out of the hot rush of the morning. I worked in my garden. I put my hands in the cold spring soil, and I pulled weeds, and I thought, the way I think best, with my hands busy and my mind loose. There is a wisdom in the hands that the head does not have. I have solved more hard problems on my knees in a garden bed than I ever solved sitting at a desk. Around noon, Claire texted again. Did you get my message? And I felt the small tug of the lifelong habit, the trained reflex of a mother to reassure her child instantly, to never let her worry, to be the reliable weather. My thumb actually moved toward the phone. 33 years of reflex, right there in my thumb. And I stopped, and I did not answer that, either. Not out of coldness, out of a decision. Because the reliable weather reflex was exactly the thing that had gotten us here, and I was not going to feed it one more time, not even with a smiley face, not even to spare her 10 minutes of mild uncertainty. The uncertainty was, I was beginning to understand, the most loving thing I could give her. It was the beginning of her learning to see me. A person you can make wait. A person whose answer is not guaranteed in advance. That is a person you have to actually look at. The weather you do not look at. You only look at what might surprise you. I want to tell you how strange that felt, to deliberately not reassure my own child. It felt wrong in my body, physically wrong, like holding my hand over a flame. Every value I had, every instinct, every year of training as a mother and a nurse said, relieve the suffering in front of you, reassure, soothe, be present, do not let them dangle. And I had to override all of it, consciously, with the slow, cold knowledge that the suffering I would be relieving was the very suffering that might, if I let it sit, finally teach her something. That is one of the hardest things I have ever learned, that sometimes the most loving act is to not relieve a discomfort, to let it do its work, to trust that the person can carry it, and that carrying it is the thing that will grow them. I had spent my life relieving discomfort. I was going to have to learn at 61 when not to. By evening, I knew what I was going to do. And I want to tell you that what I decided was not what the title of this story might lead you to expect. People love the version where the wronged mother delivers a devastating one-liner and walks off into the sunset. I have seen that version. I understand its appeal. There is a justice in it that feels good. But I had spent 29 years learning that the satisfying response and the effective response are very rarely the same response, and that the thing that feels good to say in the moment is almost always the thing that closes a door you will later wish you had left open. The devastating one-liner wins the moment and loses the daughter. I did not want to win a moment. I wanted to change a 33-year-old pattern. I wanted, in fact, to answer Tom's question. And you do not answer a question like that with a clever line. You answer it with your whole self, over a long evening, with the door left open. So I did not text her back at all. I called her the next morning, and I asked her to come for dinner on Friday. Just her, I said, not the twins, not Brian. And there was a pause on the line, because this was unusual, and in the pause I could hear her recalibrating, sensing that the weather had changed, and not yet knowing how. Is everything okay, Mom? She said, and there it was, the first crack of her actually seeing me. The first flicker of Mom is a person who might have a state I need to inquire about. I almost wept at it, that small question, because it was the first time in I could not remember how long that my daughter had asked after my state, in a voice that was actually waiting for the answer. Everything's fine, I said. I just want to talk to you, the way we used to. Come hungry. And I hung up, and I understood that the conversation on Friday was going to be one of the most important conversations of my life, and that I had 3 days to become the kind of woman who could have it without flinching. If this story is reaching you somewhere real, take a quiet moment to subscribe and leave a like before we go on. It's how these stories find the people who need them. Now, let's keep going. I spent those 3 days preparing, but not in the way you might think. I was not scripting lines. I have sat across from enough frightened people in enough hospital rooms to know that a script is the most useless thing in the world the moment the other person says something you did not anticipate. The script is for the comfort of the person holding it, not for the conversation. What I was doing was something deeper and harder. I was getting clear, all the way down, on what I actually needed Claire to understand, and on what I was and was not willing to do, and on the difference between the two. Because the difference between what you need someone to understand and what you need them to do is the whole game. and most family conversations fail because people confuse the two. What I needed Claire to do was small, actually. I was not going to refuse to ever help with the twins. Of course I would help with the twins. I loved them, and helping with them was a joy when it was help and not conscription. What I needed her to do was withdraw the announcement, to go back to her mom's group and say it was not, in fact, all set, to experience the friction and embarrassment of having allocated a person who turned out to have a will of her own. That friction was not a punishment. That friction was the lesson. You cannot learn that other people have weather if you are never once inconvenienced by their weather. The inconvenience is the entire curriculum. I had spent 33 years making sure Claire was never inconvenienced by my existence, and in doing so, I had made it impossible for her to learn that I existed at all. But what I needed her to understand was enormous, and it could not be commanded, only offered. I needed her to understand that I was a person, that I had retired into a life of my own, fragile and new and precious to me, that my presence in her life had always had a cost, that the cost had been hidden from her on purpose, lovingly, by her father and me, and that the hiding had been a mistake, our mistake, and that I was now, at 61, going to stop hiding it, because the alternative was to spend the rest of my life being taken for air, and because I loved her too much to let her become a woman who could not see the people who loved her. That was the thing. That could not be demanded. It could only be shown, slowly, with my whole self, across a kitchen table on a Friday night. I thought a great deal in those 3 days about the difference between a boundary that is a wall and a boundary that is a door. Most people, when they finally say no to someone who has been taking them for granted, build a wall. They say no in a way that is really an attack, a way of getting even, a way of making the other person pay for all the times they did not say no before. And the wall feels powerful, but it ends the relationship, or it hardens it into something cold. What I wanted to build was a door, a boundary that said, "You may not have my whole summer, and here is the reason. And the reason is that I am a person, and I'm telling you this because I want you closer, not farther. I want you to know the actual me, not the convenient me, because the actual me is the one who can really love you and really be loved back." A door is much harder to build than a wall. A wall you build out of anger, and anger is easy. A door you have to build out of love, and you have to keep building it even while the other person is hurt and defensive, and that is one of the hardest kinds of work there is. I cooked her favorite meal. I want you to notice that, because it matters, and because it is the part people miss when they imagine these confrontations. I did not set out to ambush my daughter or to make her feel small. I made the roast chicken she has loved since she was 4, with the lemon and the rosemary from my own garden. And I set the table with the good plates, my mother's plates, and I lit candles, not for drama, but because this was sacred, this conversation, and I wanted the room to know it. I wanted the room itself to hold the love, so that when the hard words came, they would land in a place that was unmistakably loving. The setting was the door. The roast chicken was the door. I was building it all afternoon, with my hands the way I have always loved people, except that this time, being useful was in service of being seen, and not a substitute for it. When she arrived, she was wary. I could see it. In her shoulders, the set of a person who has sensed a change in the weather and come prepared to manage it. She had, I would later learn, spent the drive rehearsing her own case, marshalling the reasons the summer arrangement made sense, ready for a negotiation. She had come, in her mind, to a meeting about babysitting logistics, and she had her points lined up: the cost of summer programs, Brian's travel schedule, the difficulty of the season, all of it true, all of it real. She was braced for a fight about babysitting, and she had brought her clipboard, the metaphorical one, the one her father used to laugh about, the one she came out of the womb holding. She was not braced for what actually happened, because what actually happened was not a fight about babysitting at all. We ate first. I did not bring it up over the chicken. We talked about the twins. Sophie had learned to say, "actually," apparently, and deployed it constantly and with total confidence, "actually, Mommy." And we both laughed, the real laugh, the one that has all 33 years in it. And in that laugh, I felt the love that was never in question, the deep current of it under everything, and I held on to that because I was about to say hard things and I needed to be saying them from inside the love and not from outside it. That is, I think, the most important thing I can tell you about how to have these conversations. You do not say the hard thing in order to wound. You say it from inside the love, as an act of the love, because some things can only be given by someone who refuses to look away. We talked too about her week, which had been hard, and I listened, and I noticed. I could not help noticing it is a thing 29 years builds into you. That even as she told me about her hard week, she did not once ask about mine. Not out of malice, out of the lifelong habit of a person who has never been required to imagine that her mother's week had a shape. And I did not point it out. I just noted it, filed it, let it strengthen my resolve, because it was one more small piece of the evidence that the thing I was about to do needed doing. She loved me, and she did not see me. And the not seeing was so total that even sitting across from me at my own table, she could not quite locate the person there. When the plates were cleared, I poured us each a glass of wine, and I sat down across from her, and I said, "Claire, I need to talk to you about the summer, and I need you to let me say the whole thing before you respond, the way your father used to make us do. Can you do that for me?" And she went still, and she nodded, and I saw the wariness in her sharpen into something closer to fear, and I understood that she thought I was about to tell her I was sick, that I had brought her here, alone, with candles, to deliver bad news, and in a way I was, but not the way she feared. I saw her brace, and I felt a flash of guilt at having frightened her, and I let the guilt pass, because the alternative to frightening her a little was to keep being the weather, and I was done being the weather. I told her no, but I did not start with the no. I started with the love, because you build the floor before you put weight on it. I told her that I loved her more than I had ever loved anything, that she had been the sun in our small house, that her father and I had poured everything into her on purpose and would do it again. And I watched her relax a degree, thinking this was going somewhere safe, thinking perhaps this was just going to be one of those warm conversations where her mother got a little sentimental. And then I told her the hard part. I told her that we had made a mistake, her father and I, that in our love for her, in our wanting her childhood to feel weightless, we had hidden the cost of that love from her, every day, for her whole life, that we had taught her, without meaning to, that our presence was free, air, weather, always there, never costing anything, never needing to be asked for, and that the bill for that mistake had arrived, finally, in a text message on Tuesday morning that announced I would be giving her my entire summer, and told the moms group before it told me. She started to speak then. I could see the defense forming, Mom. I didn't mean. The apology that is also a deflection. The quick smoothing thing that would let us both back away from the hard ground. And I held up my hand gently, and I said, "You haven't heard the whole thing yet." And she stopped, and I told her the rest. I told her about the retirement. I told her what those 29 years had been. The not getting to be tired. The setting down of my own exhaustion to pick up later. The being present at the worst hours of strangers' lives, again and again, for 3 decades. I told her about the young woman who lost her baby at 36 weeks, and the chair I sat in, until dawn so she would not wake alone. I had never told Claire that story. I had never told Claire most of my stories, because she had never asked, and because I had a lifetime's habit of leaving my own weight out of the room. And I watched my daughter hear, for perhaps the first time, who her mother actually was at that hospital for 29 years. Not a nurse, the flat word she would have used, the administrator word, the word that holds a whole life at arm's length, but a person who sat in chairs until dawn so that frightened strangers would not be alone. I told her that I had retired into a small and fragile plan, a plan to finally be present at the center of my own life after a career spent at the edges of other people's, the garden in the mornings, the pottery class with the brochure on the refrigerator held up by the tomato magnet, and the lake. I told her about the lake, the dock where her father and I used to sit, the dock I had not been able to face in 4 years, and how part of my plan, the deepest part, was to find out this summer whether enough time had passed that I could sit on that dock again. And I watched my daughter's face change as I said it, because she had not known about the lake. She had not known I had been unable to go. She had not known there was a grief in me, ongoing, 4 years on, that I had. Of course I had. It is what I do. It is what we did for her, kept carefully out of her. sight. She had thought, I think, that I had simply gotten over her father's death because I had never let her see that I had not, because letting her see it would have made my grief into a thing she had to hold, and I had spent her whole life making sure she never had to hold anything heavy of mine. You announced my summer to your mom's group, I said, before you asked me, because it did not occur to you that I had a summer of my own. And I am not telling you that to shame you, Claire. I am telling you that to free you, because a woman who cannot see that her mother is a person is going to spend her whole life unable to see the people who love her, and she is going to take them for air the way she was taught to, and one day they are going to be gone, the way your father is gone, and she is going to discover all at once everything they cost and everything they gave, and it will be too late to thank them. I do not want that for you. I love you too much to leave you like that, so I am going to teach you the thing your father and I should have taught you years ago, and I am going to teach it the only way it can be taught, which is by saying no to you for the first time in your life that actually matters. And then I said the no, clean and quiet, and without apology. I am not going to babysit the twins full-time this summer. You'll need to call your mom's group and tell them it isn't set. I know that. Will be uncomfortable, and I am not going to rescue you from that discomfort, because the discomfort is the part that teaches. I will help with the twins this summer, gladly, joyfully, because I love them, but I will help when you ask me, as one person asking another person for a favor that has a cost, and not when you allocate me. The difference between those two things is the difference between a daughter and a person who has a mother-shaped resource. I want to be your mother. I do not want to be your resource, and I love you enough to make you sit in the difference until you can feel it. The room was very quiet. The candles were burning down. Outside, the spring evening had gone full dark, and I could hear the small sounds of the house, the old radiator ticking, the wind in the sugar maple, the particular settling silence of an old house at night. And my daughter sat across from me, and she did not defend herself, which is the thing I will remember until I die. She did not marshal her reasons. She did not tell me about how hard her life was, though her life is hard, and we both knew it, and I would not have blamed her for saying it. She sat there, and her face came apart, slowly, the way a face comes apart when a person is seeing something for the first time that has been in front of them their whole life. I have watched a great many faces do that, in hospital rooms mostly, in the moment when a person stops fighting the truth of a thing and lets it in. It is the most human thing I know, that coming apart. It is the face of a person becoming larger. And then she said, and her voice was very small, the voice of the little girl with the clipboard, the voice from underneath all 33 years. She said, I didn't know about the lake. And I said, I know you didn't. That's exactly the point. There's a whole person here you've never been shown. That's not your fault, Claire. We hid her from you. Your father saw it before he died. He made me promise to show you. And I didn't, for 4 years. Because I'm built the same way you are. I'd rather disappear into being useful than risk being a person you have to actually look at. So this is me, finally, keeping a promise to your father. This is me, 4 years late, showing you the woman he was afraid you'd never get to meet. That undid her. The mention of Tom, the idea that he had seen this coming, that he had worried about it from his deathbed, that there had been a whole conversation about her between her dying father and her mother that she had never known about. It undid her completely. And my daughter, who had not cried in front of me in years, who had grown up inside a love so reliable she never learned it could break, my daughter put her face in her hands and wept, and I did not rush to comfort her. This is the hardest thing I did all night, harder than the no, harder than any of it. Every instinct in my body, 33 years of trained reflex, 29 years of nursing on top of it, screamed at me to get up and go around the table and hold her and tell her it was all right, to be the reliable weather one more time, to make the discomfort go away. My whole body leaned toward her, and I did not move, because the discomfort was the lesson, and to rescue her from it would have been to take the lesson away, and I loved her too much to take it away. So I let my daughter cry. I sat with her in it, present, the way I had been, present at the edge of 1,000 other lives, present the way I was in that chair at dawn, but present without rescuing, which is a different and harder kind of presence, and one I had to learn that very night, at 61 years old, across my own kitchen table, for my own weeping child. I sat in the love without fixing it. I let the weight land on her fully, because some weights have to be carried by the person they belong to, and this one was hers. When she finally looked up, something had changed in her face. I had seen that change before, in hospital rooms, on the faces of people who had just been through the worst hour and come out the other side into a clarity they had not had going in. It is a kind of cleanness, a kind of rinsed-out openness. She looked at me, really looked, the way you look at a person, not the way you look at the weather, and she said, "Tell me about the lake." And I did. We sat at that table until almost midnight, and I told my daughter about her father and me at the lake, the dock, the particular quality of the light there in the late afternoon when the sun came down over the far ridge and laid a gold road across the water, the way we used to sit there not talking, the small green canoe, the loons at dusk, the grief I had been carrying, the plan to go back, and she listened, fully, for the first time in I do not know how long, not waiting for her turn, not managing the conversation, just listening, meeting the person across the table. She asked questions, real ones. What did Dad love about it? Were you happy there? Why couldn't you go back? And I answered them, all of them, and with each answer, I felt 33 years of invisibility lifting, just slightly, just enough. And it was, I will tell you, one of the best nights of my life. Not because I won, there was no winning, but because for the first time in 33 years, my daughter saw me, and I had finally stopped being the air she breathed and become. Instead, a person she could choose to love on purpose. I want to tell you what happened with the summer, because the practical question is real, and I made you a promise to tell the true version of things and not the comfortable one. And the comfortable version always skips the part where the hard thing is actually hard. Claire called her mom's group. She told me, a few days later, that it was excruciating, that she had to walk back something she had announced as settled, and that one of the women had been sharp about it, had made a comment about people who say one thing and do another, and that she had felt small and disorganized and embarrassed in front of women whose good opinion she cared about. And I told her I was proud of her, and I meant it with my whole heart, because she had sat in the discomfort and not asked me to take it from her. And that was the entire lesson, learned. I did not call the moms group myself. I did not send her a long text smoothing it over. I did not, when she told me how hard it had been, immediately offer to take an extra day to make up for it. I let it be hard. The hardness was the gift. I had spent 33 years stealing the hardness out of her life. And stealing the hardness out of a person's life is, I have come to believe, one of the most damaging things you can do to someone you love, because it leaves them soft in exactly the places where they most need to be strong. She and Brian sorted out the summer the way two adults sort out a hard problem. A part-time program for the twins, 3 mornings a week. A teenager from their street 2 afternoons. A rearrangement of Brian's travel that he had apparently been able to make all along, but had never been asked to make, because I had always been the frictionless solution that made asking unnecessary. That last part stayed with me. Brian could have traveled less all along. He had simply never been asked because the existence of a freed-up grandmother had absorbed all the pressure that might have led to the asking. My constant availability had not only made me invisible, it had let an entire marriage avoid a conversation it needed to have. That is what frictionlessness does. It looks like help, and underneath, it quietly prevents people from building the things they need to build. The summer got solved. It got solved better, in fact, than it would have been solved by conscripting me, because solving it required Claire and Brian to actually look at their life and build something sustainable instead of patching the hole with their mother. And I helped. Of course I helped. I had the twins for long, happy days throughout that summer, days that Claire asked me for, one person asking another, with a gratitude in the asking that had never been there in the allocating. Mom, is there any chance you'd be free Thursday? I know you've got your pottery, only if it works. That sentence. I know you've got your pottery. My daughter, acknowledging that I had a life with things in it, things that were mine, things that her request had to make room around. I cannot tell you what it did to me the first time she said a sentence like that. I had to turn around at the sink so she would not see my face. The difference between asking and allocating, Claire told me near the end of the summer, the difference between those two words had changed something in her she could not fully name. She said she had started to notice it everywhere. With Brian, with her friends, with the women in her mom's group, even with the twins. She had started to see the cost of things. She had started, at 33, to understand that the people in her life were people, with weather of their own, and that love was something you asked for and tended and never, ever took for air. And I went to the lake. I went in July, on a clear blue morning, alone, the way I needed to do it. I drove up north with the windows down and the radio off, 3 hours into the mountains, and I parked at the little gravel turnout we always used, and I walked down the path through the pines to the dock, and I sat down at the end of it where Tom and I used to sit, and I found out whether enough time had passed. I will not tell you everything I found, because some things belong only to the person and the dock and the water, but I will tell you this. I sat there a long time. The light came down over the far ridge in the late afternoon and laid that gold road across the water, the same gold road, exactly as it always had, indifferent to the fact that the man who used to watch it with me was gone, and I waited to be destroyed by it, the way I had been afraid I would be, the way I had been protecting myself from being for 4 years, and I was not destroyed. I was sad, a deep, clean, enormous sadness, the kind that is almost indistinguishable from love, that is in fact just love with nowhere to go. But I was not destroyed. I sat at the end of the dock where my husband and I had been happy, and I let the sadness move all the way through me, the way I had let the grief move through me at the kitchen table in April, without acting on it, without running from it, just feeling it to the bottom. And when it had finished moving through me, what was left was not emptiness. What was left was the lake and the gold road on the water and a loon calling somewhere out past the point, and me, still there, still myself, still alive, at the center of my own life. I had almost given that away. I had almost handed that summer over frictionlessly, the way I had handed everything over for 33 years. And if I had, I would not have been sitting on that dock. I would have been in a hot suburban living room watching 2 3-year-olds, loving them, yes, but absent from my own life, the lake unfaced for another year and another, until the years ran out the way they always do. The no I said in April was the reason I was on that dock in July. The no I said to my daughter was, underneath everything, a yes. I finally said to myself, the first one in a very long time, and I drove home in the late light with the windows down, feeling something I had not felt in 4 years, which was that my own life, the one at the center, was still there, waiting for me, exactly where I had left it. It is autumn now. The sugar maple in my yard has gone the color of a struck match, the way it does every October, and the twins came over last weekend and stood under it shrieking with joy as I shook the lower branches and made the red leaves come down on their heads. Sam tried to catch them in his mouth. Sophie informed me, gravely, that the leaves were actually not red. They were orange-red, and I agreed that she was correct, because she was. And Claire was here too. She sat on the wide front porch with a cup of coffee and watched, and at one point she came and stood beside me under the maple, and she said, without my prompting, "Thank you for that summer, Mom. Not the babysitting, the other thing, the harder thing." And I knew exactly what she meant, and I put my arm around my daughter, and we stood there under the falling leaves and watched her children, and I did not say anything, because some things do not need to be said once they have finally been understood. And then she said one more thing, quietly, looking at the twins and not at me. She said, "I want them to know you, the real you. Not just Grandma who babysits. I want them to know there's a whole person there." And I thought about Tom, who had asked me to make her see me before it was too late, and I thought about how close it had come to being too late, and how it had not been. And I held my daughter a little tighter under the maple, and I did not trust myself to speak. I have thought a great deal in the months since that Tuesday morning about what I actually did when I declined to babysit the twins. From the outside, it looks like a small thing, even a selfish thing, a grandmother who would not give up her summer. I have made my peace with how it looks from the outside, because I know what it actually was. What it actually was was the end of a 33-year mistake. It was me finally keeping a promise to my dying husband. It was me finally teaching my daughter the thing her father told me, near the end, that we had failed to teach her, that the people who love you are people, that their love has a cost, and that a love whose cost you never see is a love you will never learn to honor. I gave her that. It cost me a summer of easy answers, and a difficult night across a candle-lit table, and 3 days of overriding every instinct in my body. It gave her, I hope, a lifetime of being able to see the people who love her before it is too late to thank them. That is not a small thing. That is the largest thing a mother can give, and it is disguised, almost always, as a no. My husband was right about her all those years ago. She came out with a clipboard. She had organized the whole summer before she thought to ask the person she had scheduled into it. But he was right about something else too. The thing he said near the end. The thing I did not understand until a text message arrived on a Tuesday morning and asked me to give away the life I had just barely gotten back. She knows we love her. She doesn't know what it costs us. She knows now. I made sure of it. I kept the promise. And the knowing has not cost us the love. It has, if anything, made the love real for the first time, taken it out of the realm of weather and air, and made it a thing my daughter chooses, on purpose, with her eyes open, knowing the cost, and choosing it anyway. That is the only kind of love that lasts. The kind you can see the price of, and choose. I should have taught her that years ago. Tom asked me to, and I waited 4 years, and I have made my peace. With the waiting too, because I have learned that you cannot teach a thing until you have learned it yourself. And I do not think I truly understood, until that text message arrived, how completely I had disappeared into being useful, how thoroughly I had abandoned myself in the guise of loving everyone else. I had to find my own life worth defending before I could teach my daughter that it existed. The text message did me that favor in the end. It made me defend the thing I had almost given away, and in defending it, I finally believed it was mine. 61 is not too late. That is the thing I most want you to take from this, whoever you are, wherever you are sitting. It is never too late to stop being the heir, and to become, instead, a person, and to give the people you love the chance, finally, to truly see you. It is never too late to keep a promise. It is never too late to face the lake. The leaves are falling. The lake is closed for the season now, but it will be there in the spring. And so, for the first time in a long time, will I.